Take me to the diamond, lead me through the turnstile, shower me with data that I never thought to compile. Now I'm filling out my scorecard with a cracker-jack smile, effectively wild.
Hello and welcome to episode 2445 of Effectively Wild, a baseball podcast from FanGraphs presented by our Patreon supporters. I am Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer, joined by Meg Rowley of FanGraphs. Hello, Meg.
Hello.
Not a ton of big baseball news in recent days. Max Scherzer did indeed sign with the Blue Jays. Chris Sale signed an extension with Atlanta. And Jacob Misiorowski did not actually throw a 100-plus mile per hour pitch at or near the head of Brewers' top prospect, Cooper Pratt. It was just some clever video editing. So just a couple things we wanted to touch on, and then we're getting to our two previews. And we're talking about two teams with strong starting rotations and Red Sox, one of which is actually called the Red Sox. We'll be talking to Alex Speier of the Boston Globe about the Red Sox, followed by Trent Rosecrans of The Athletic about the former Red Legs, the Cincinnati Reds. The item you wanted to bring to our banter today, Meg, is some advice you have for top prospect in the sport, Konnor Griffin, and his receptiveness to an extension. And you're here to say, don't do it, Konnor. Sorry, Pirates fans. You can't keep him. That's what you're telling Pirates fans.
I have to introduce a number of caveats, which is that this is a report that there is an openness to extension talks on both sides. Yeah. And that makes a tremendous amount of sense from the Pirates' perspective. And look, you should always take the call. You know, you should always take the call. You're trying to establish a relationship. I never feel comfortable telling any individual player that he should not have an openness to this conversation, right? And I understand why guys contemplate pre-debut extensions. I understand why a lot of guys sign pre-debut extensions. And obviously the devil is in the details as it pertains to these things, because sometimes it's not a bad deal. Sometimes it's, you're getting past the messy discomfort of arbitration, right? Sometimes it's just a little smoothing of the way. And we know that there are times when the pace at which a guy debuts is sometimes predicated on his willingness to sign one of these deals, right?
Yeah, so, like Samuel Basallo last year with the Orioles, for instance.
Right, and signed right after he debuted, yeah.
Yeah, to be clear, this is all based on a single sentence, I believe.
One report.
A piece by Noah Hiles, who covers the Pirates. And there are no quotes or anything.
Nope.
It's just such a deal makes plenty of sense for both parties. This is just about how young he is. Sure. And, such a deal makes plenty of sense for both parties and per conversations with numerous sources. So that's the part that makes it somewhat newsworthy, that this is not just pure speculation. Sure. Both parties are indeed open toward making this happen. That was it. That's the sum total of the information that we have about the openness, but they're open. That's what we know.
So I don't want to overstate the case. I don't want to raise an unnecessarily loud alarm here. And I think that there are times when these deals, they work out fine. They work out fine for both parties. They almost always work out well for the team, even when it doesn't go super great with the player, because they often involve money that isn't that significant. But they can work out fine, and guys can go on to make meaningful money in free agency. And so again, I'm making a tiny splash. I'm putting a small stone in the pool. But I would say a couple of things. The first is Konnor Griffin is wildly talented, stupid talented.
As he demonstrated with 2 huge home runs in a game this week.
I didn't watch them until my workday was done because I don't believe in watching porn at work, Ben. No, I'm kidding. But I just, incredibly talented young prospect who, might very well make it obvious that he just belongs on the Pittsburgh Pirates from day one. And, will they honor that sense? We don't know yet, but we do know that there are strong incentives for them to put him on the roster, whatever it might do to his free agency timeline, because obviously we have the prospect promotion incentives in place here, et cetera. So very talented young guy, might just make the team out of camp. And I think that there are a couple of things that should make him bet on himself. The first of which is that talent. The second of which is Konnor Griffin made $6.5 million 2 years ago just from his draft bonus, right? So sometimes the guys we see entertain these deals are prospects who maybe didn't make as much at signing or, often unfortunately come from circumstance where the life-changingness of the money makes an even bigger impact than it would just for your average player, right? I think there's a reason that we not exclusively, but often maybe have seen the balance of these deals tilt toward players who are coming from Latin America, where there might be additional incentive beyond, domestic players to take these contracts. So there's that. Konnor, you just made $6.5 million. You made $6.5 million. So there's that piece of it. The second piece is I think that, as we have seen in dramatic fashion with Skubal, but have plenty of examples on the position player side, many of which I think are maybe both more relevant to Konnor Griffin and also more dramatic in terms of their regularity. You can make a lot of money in arbitration if you're as good a player as we think Konnor Griffin is going to be. So don't foreclose the opportunity to make a bunch of money in ARB. And also, who knows what the compensation landscape in Major League Baseball is going to look like a year from now. Now, there are downside scenarios there from Konnor Griffin's perspective, but I would imagine that the CBA also has the potential to change the arbitration system maybe in a way that is beneficial to young players. So I just would say, young Konnor, you should bet on yourself and your big old neck and just be invested in the particulars of this if it is something that you are actually contemplating. And again, it's a tricky business because for any individual guy, you might be saying, hey, forego sure thing, life-changing money for what? Some abstract understanding of both your future potential earnings and also a notion of labor solidarity. I understand how that might not be compelling, but I think that of all the guys, this is a guy who should bet on himself, and he should bet that he's going to be as good as we think he is, that he's going to be as good as he thinks he is, and that if he signs a pre-debut extension, it should be one that gives him just the most potential future earnings upside. Because the other thing about him is that if he makes the team out of camp, he's not even going to be 20 yet. This is the kind of profile that we have seen just clean up in free agency if the player is as good as we think he is. So just guard your upside because you seem to sure have a lot of it, Konnor.
I'm sure there are Pirates fans who are muttering, "Shh, Meg, stop! Don't tell him. We need him. Don't con block us here."
And you do,
because
and you're going to get him for at least 6 years.
Right? And Pirates fans, look, they have suffered. They have put up with plenty of nutting.
Oh, sure.
And so, look, if he gets a great offer, then sure,
then he should take it.
By all means, sign it. But it's the Pirates after all.
Right.
So what's the likelihood that Bob Nutting is going to break the bank here and offer some great deal that would blow away anyone? So I think you're right. I don't know a ton about Konnor Griffin's family background. I know his dad is a Division III softball coach. I don't know that they're of any amazing means, but it's true that he just got a $6.5 million bonus. And I know we always talk about an extension, that's life-changing money. That sets you up. I mean, $6.5 million when you're 18, if you invest that wisely, you're pretty set for
when
life.
You're almost 40, it would move the needle in a dramatic way, you know?
Yeah, you're doing okay as long as you don't fritter that away. You're gonna be fine. Again, I don't know what other demands and expenses and whatever else, but as far as I know, he's not like one of the mega wealthy baseball background people. But I don't know that far, so take that for what it's worth. But yeah, he got a big bonus, and that should take some of the pressure off, I would think.
We would hope.
Now, I mentioned on a recent episode that he already got hitched. He is married.
That's right.
He got married to his high school sweetheart. I think they've been dating since they were 14, and they just got married. So perhaps he's the kind of guy who likes to arrange things long term. Just, hey, no muss, no fuss.
Sure.
Found a girl I like. We'll be together forever. Found a team I like. Seems great to me. I'll just, for till death do us part, and till whenever the contract term is up, I'll stick around. So it could be that maybe he's just the kind of guy who likes to arrange long-term relationships, and perhaps he will be more receptive to it than some might. But you're right that he should be in no hurry here. Obviously, there's always some degree of risk, and injuries can happen. He's not a pitcher, too, and he's just so talented and has such a great all-around game that it's like, what's the downside here? I mean, unless there is some truly catastrophic injury or something. I don't even want to put that out in the world, but in a baseball sense, like, okay, sure, there's some chance that he doesn't hit his ceiling, that he doesn't live up to the billing of best prospect in baseball, best prospect in years, arguably. But even if he hits some lower percentile outcome, still probably going to make a good deal of money playing baseball. So yeah, don't rush into anything. Don't be too hasty. But if you get an amazing offer, then by all means, I know that Pirates fans, they've been on Skeen's watch. They're counting down the seasons. They know the days are maybe numbered for him. And so if a Konnor Griffin just fell into their lap long term, I'm sure they'd be thrilled, because that seems to be the only way that the Pirates can build a winner under Bob Nutting, is just to get cheap, cost-controlled players. But yes, you do have several years to play with him and to convince him to stick around and to change your ways and actually spend and make the Pirates a desirable destination where someone might actually want to stay long term and actually get the kind of money that would justify that investment. So yeah, it is extension season, and we're going to hear about plenty of young players signing extensions in the coming weeks. But this is based on a single sentence and some background conversation. So we'll see. But yes, you've planted a flag.
I don't even know if I'm planting a flag. I'm simply saying, hey.
A cautionary note.
Hey.
Yeah.
Just bet on yourself. Just bet on yourself. All of the people in this family have the same neck. My God, look at them. Sorry, I'm looking at Konnor Griffin's wedding photos now. It's on Instagram. What do you want from me?
Yeah, a lot of K names in the family as well, I believe. But
we're gonna leave that alone.
I'm sure that his representatives are also expressing some of the same sentiments.
I have no doubt.
One would hope he doesn't have to get career advice from a podcast from people who don't know him.
I'm sure he does not. Yes.
Yeah,
if nothing else, Paul Skeens is right there, So I'm sure that he is well tended. I'm sure that he will make good choices. And obviously he needs to make choices that are make the most sense for him and his family. And again, all of the caveats. I'm just saying, bet on yourself and your big neck, young man. You can do it.
Yes. Did you see what Skeens said about the WBC?
I did see that. Paul.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man.
He was talking about the Olympics and Team USA and hockey and gold and women's hockey, men's hockey, all the we're America. We've got to assert our dominance over everybody else. That's what we do, which is not untrue.
The back half of that is correct.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know
what we do.
Right.
It's going to be fun. USA wins. It's what we do. Got to keep it going. Yeah, we've got to assert our dominance. I don't know if this is like a Bull Durham. We've got to establish the fastball. Maybe interesting phrasing. A little bit of a jingoistic sentiment there from Paul.
You did go to the Air Force Academy.
kind of discordant with the report that he's only making 2 starts in the tournament, and that then Tarik Skubal is only making 1. And so we did talk a lot about how, hey, Team USA, they figured it out. They recruited pitchers. They've got 2 of the best in the game, if not the 2 best. And then walk back a bit because Skubal, he's just kind of doing a tune-up against Great Britain, I guess. And then he's going back to Tigers camp, and Skeens is making 2 starts seemingly, but they're both going to be gone, it appears, by the time the later games roll around. So if there's a championship, then the U.S. might not be asserting its dominance with either Tarik Skubal or Paul Skeens, but presumably Logan Webb will be around. So that's something. All right. And the last thing I wanted to say, to segue to our Red Sox preview, did you see the clip of Red Sox outfielder Wilyer Abreu, who had his bat break on a check swing?
Yeah.
This was weird. So he checked his swing and the bat broke. It just, everything but the handle fell off, like the bottom of the handle. And he was left with the bottom of the handle in one hand and one empty hand. And then he just sort of stared at his hand in a comic way. And it was one of the weirder things. I don't know that I recall seeing this exactly. And he said he didn't know what happened and why it happened. I assume that the bat was damaged. That it had to have been an issue with the bat, right? I would think it. And even if he's the strongest man in the world, I don't know. Like there must have been a hairline crack or something that he just didn't notice. But it was weird and sort of a slapstick. He did like an actual double take. He's like, whoop, whoop, and then just froze and then walked back to the dugout. But the thing is, he got called for a strike, and it was ruled a strikeout, and there was an appeal, I think, and so it was ruled that he went around, and the bat went around. Like the bat continued on because he stopped his swing. He did check his swing, and his hands were like moving back really by the point the bat splintered, but the bat continued forward. And so I guess the idea was that the bat went around. Yeah. But I kind of question whether that's the correct call or not. Check swings, it's also nebulous as it is. And I kind of hope and think that will soon be measured and there will be some technology brought to bear, and they've tested various solutions. I
need a better rule about it, but
well, it would also be good maybe to have an actual definition of what a swing is, because there just really has never been one, which is part of the problem. So people have rules of thumb when it comes to check swings. Like people will say, oh, it's this angle, it's 45-degree angle, it's broke the plane of the plate or whatever. That's all just, we're adding that. That's not in the rule book. So the rules just say that it's an attempt to strike the ball, basically. It's really just a judgment call. But I don't think this was an attempt to strike the ball. I think that Wilyer Abreu attempted to stop his bat. And I've talked about how sometimes my initial take on whether someone went around or not is off. And then I watch the replay and realize, oh, no, they went around more than I thought or whatever. But in this case, it looks to me on the side view like he stopped, he held up, but the bat didn't. And so I don't think you could say that he actually made an attempt to strike the ball here. I think he had decided not to, but his bat had other ideas. So that's probably tough to gauge for an umpire in the moment, maybe. But I don't think the bat continuing on should actually count against him, really.
Right, because the way that the rule is written, it's conditioned on the intent of the hitter, which is, hard to discern. And it's, I think, a bad fuzzy rule, and it begs for clarification. It cries out for a better written rule. And I have to say, as someone who has seen the sort of check swing challenge stuff in action, my enthusiasm around the challenge system as it pertains to ball and strikes, not matching it when it comes to the check swing stuff. I think that needs a more cooking. It is not yet fully baked, but it does seem a little unfair to penalize him for the intent of the bat How could he have anticipated bat sentience? You know?
The bat does not actually have a mind of its own, and we can't consider its wishes here. I don't think we've talked about sentient baseballs, maybe bats too, but I don't think that's what happens here. Unless that explains what happened here. The bat actually attained consciousness and decided that it wanted to go around, and it did. That's my ruling, at least, but no one appealed to me. All right, let us take a quick break, and we will be back to talk about Wilyer Abreu and other Red Sox players with Alex Speier of the Boston Globe, followed by C. Trent Rosecrans on the Reds.
Have a catch and a slog with me in a virtual rise. From small sample size, these fun facts must lie. It's effectively wild, a strange but good hang, effectively wild.
All right, we have the great pleasure to be joined once again by the erudite Alex Speier of the Boston Globe. Welcome back to the umpteenth Red Sox preview on Effectively Wild that you have been a part of, Alex.
I am very honored, although I would think that by now you would know that erudite is probably a misleading term to throw at me. Maybe more accurate to call me hemorrhoidal, based on your conversations recently. But, here we are, and I'm very flattered and delighted to be on.
Well, I didn't say concise, to be clear, but but I wouldn't say that about myself either. So your colleague at the Globe, Peter Abraham, posted something earlier this month that I wanted to get your thoughts on. And it was basically about a lot of things seem to be going right for the Red Sox right now. And this was my impression, too, that there's a lot to be optimistic about. They just made the playoffs. They've made some major additions this offseason. They have some exciting young guys, some of whom they've extended. And it hasn't been that long since they were good and won World Series, especially by Red Sox historical franchise standards. And yet, Pete Abe said, even the most innocuous spring training stories are met with comments about how terrible things are with the team, how cheap the owners are, how Cora is a dope, etc. Social media is the same. Why is everybody so miserable? Guessing many of you are longtime fans of the Sox. Imagine me telling you in 2003 that in 2026 they'll have won 4 championships and you'll be mad they haven't won a 5th yet. I'm genuinely interested where the anger is coming from. And this was a sincere curiosity, I think, and it prompted hundreds of responses. And maybe why is everybody so miserable is just a broad question that we could ask, not solely.
Welcome to 2026. Yeah.
Yeah. People on social media are mad, you say, but I wonder how this pertains to the Red Sox specifically. Certainly understand all the bad vibes post Betts trade and post other trades and post payroll being reduced, etc. But things do seem to be looking up, at least from an outsider perspective. So what's your sense, based on the feedback you've seen, of the sentiment of the fan base?
Yeah, well, I think that they're coming out of what was at least a trough, if not a nadir, right? Like the period that followed the Mookie Betts trade of, multiple last place finishes certainly created an amplified skepticism that maybe tapped into a muscle that was waiting to be exercised after having been exorcised over the course of the early part of the 20th century. It is the longest gap that this ownership group has ever endured without winning a championship. They've gone a whole 8 years without winning a title. And so I suppose that there had been a creeping sense of championship birthright that has been thrown asunder. But, it was there was a definitive change in terms of how the team operated, the kinds of players that it was acquiring, that led to a prevailing sentiment of skepticism that's hard to overcome. The idea of making moves for very good players as opposed to the established superstars fails to kind of address the skepticism that exists surrounding that, right? So it's one thing to sign the $300 million players and to sign the Sotos and the Otanis of the world, and another thing to to sign the Ranger Suarez's of the world. And they've made a number of intelligent strategic choices. The Garrett Crochet extension is a great one. Extension for Roman Anthony is likely a great one. But nonetheless, that doesn't change the perception that the operating model has shifted from a team that was top 2, top 3 in payroll on a perennial basis to one that's kind of in a different tier. Not that far down, but, kind of the idea of where they are now in that, let's call it the 6 through 8 range. Like that's a different space to occupy. And so until they win, there's going to be it's not like it used to be, whether that's from the standpoint of operationally or in terms of ultimately the results. But it is an interesting thing in that it's where the kind of bar of like the generational bars have been changed completely over the course of what people think they're entitled to.
Yeah, I'm just saying it could be worse. You could be the Yankees after all. So, and they're just extended drought. And by the way, since you said it this way, I know that the pitcher formerly known as Ranger Suarez, he did specify that he prefers Ranger, right? So but he said he's okay with Ranger, right?
He said he's totally okay with Ranger, and it's interesting to make but he clarified that yes, my name is Ranger. But like Alex Cora, for instance, calls him Ranger. So yeah, we're navigating this, and I've approached him on multiple occasions and asked if he has any real preference. And it's his name; he should get to choose how people treat it. But he refuses to express a preference.
Well, he might be a good place to start, or at least an entry point to another thing that might be troubling some Red Sox fans, because I think that this team got better this offseason, but the roster is shaped kind of weird, right? Like the way that this club went about reinforcing itself seemed a little strange to me, because boy, they have a lot of pitching, and they have a lot of outfielders, and then they also have a Caleb Durbin ? And so I want to talk about each of these sort of individual spots and the players that occupy them, but I wonder if you can just help us understand sort of, is this the strategy that the front office went into the offseason with? Is this where they meant to sort of add and fortify, or was it a more opportunistic, hey, Suarez is there for us, we can do these deals with St. Louis? The Brewers have realized they have
over there.
Yeah, they have. Yeah. We know someone over there. The Brewers have like 5 different versions of Caleb Durbin, so surely one of them is sort of expendable from their perspective. Or was there a more sort of cohesive approach that they went into the offseason with, and they would look back and say, well, we executed on what we meant to do here?
Yeah, at the GM meetings at the very beginning of the offseason, Craig Breslow outlined 2 priorities. His desire was to add a number 2 starter and to add a kind of legitimate power threat. It was interesting because they acquired Sonny Gray, and it was like, it's kind of debatable whether or not Gray scratched that itch as a guy who is coming off back-to-back 200 punch-out seasons and has this wonderful strikeout-to-walk rate, but also, tends to be, he was a kind of middling ERA in a very favorable pitcher's park. So it was like, is Gray a 2? Is he a 3? It felt like they were kind of okay with where they were with the rotation. Then the opportunity came about to acquire Wilson Contreras, who's, really good, like on a very consistent basis. But again, doesn't profile as like one of the elite power hitters in the game, not the pure masher. Like he's never hit more than 24 homers in a season. He has he probably has plus raw power, but it's never translated to huge home run totals for a number of reasons, right? He was a catcher, which is different in terms of power threat. And then a couple of years ago, he ends up having his wrist smashed by JD Martinez. That's no good for hitting the ball very far. And, for any number of other reasons. And so they wanted Alex Bregman back. Make no mistake. It was definitely described in the kind of like shocked aftermath of Bregman's decision to sign with the Cubs as, plan A is off the board. It was at that point opportunistic of what is the best, what did they see as the best path for improving after Bregman was gone. And so that was a pretty quick turn. Like Craig Breslow has talked a lot, about how it's important to be flexible over the course of off seasons. And they made they made an acknowledged shift to leaning hard on the pitching and defense question. And, I think that they would have been very happy making a move for an infielder such as a Ketel Marte, who was no longer available by the time Bregman made his decision to sign with the Cubs. Or, they were very interested in Isaac Paredes, and they weren't able to match up with that. You point out the kind of outfield depth. The Astros did not really seem interested in a Duran for Paredes type of deal. And so they ended up kind of defining what they were comfortable with in terms of acquisition cost, allowing that to do a lot to shape their offseason. To your point, Meg, I agree. I think that it's a better balanced roster. I think that it's like the floor all over the place looks like it's elevated higher, but they didn't acquire that one superstar player over the course of the offseason. Whether or not Alex Bregman would have been that guy, I think from a perception standpoint, people would have felt better about the idea of Bregman being back just because he was a known quantity, and there was this whole dynamic of how he helped the young players along and that sort of thing. But I think that it's a really weird offseason that for being a good offseason, it has engendered more skepticism than you'll usually see.
And the individual player power projections, that's been a big talking point, right? The fact that the Red Sox don't have anyone who's projected to hit 25 or more home runs, at least according to FanGraphs. I guess it just depends on which projection system and which site you're looking at. So Wilson Contreras, FanGraphs depth charts, which is Steamer and Zips and playing time estimates, is at 23, and he's the high man there. And to be clear, this is preseason projections, which are always pretty conservative. And so there are only 61 hitters in all of baseball who are projected to hit 25 or more home runs, but that's still 2 per team, and the Red Sox don't have any of them. However, they do have 9 guys projected to hit double-digit home runs, right? So does this matter? Is this something worth being alarmed over? And, if no individual player is projected to hit 25 homers, that doesn't mean that FanGraphs is projecting that no Red Sox player will hit 25 home runs. Someone will. It's just that individually.
Well, maybe.
Well, yes, I guess it's not guaranteed, but they were middle of the pack power-wise last year, right? And so
when they had Bregman had Bregman and for half a season Rafael Devers. Right. Mm-hmm. So
what happened to him? I forget.
Yeah. What happened to them? Posing for a nice Instagram photo together, which did get noticed back in Boston. Yeah. It's super interesting, right? Because I guess, you can.
Trevor Story hit 25 last year.
Story hit 25 last year. He's the only he's the only person in their lineup who has ever hit 25 homers, right? Because Contreras has topped out at 24. Wilyer Abreu has never hit more than 22. Roman Anthony in a professional season has never hit more than 18. It's really interesting because, the Zips forecasts are even more Zips in isolation is even more skeptical, right? I think that they don't have anyone hitting more than 18 for the Red Sox in the coming season. But it's not that hard, to your point, Ben, to think about so let's say that's a 50th percentile projection. Is it 25 homers for a lot of these guys? Would that be a 60th percentile projection? It's not a 90th percentile projection. If you look at these guys, I think that Wilson Contreras, you move him out of Busch Stadium, which is under discussed as an absolute graveyard for hitting, right? It is a horrible place for fly ball productivity. I think that there's a chance for him to, now that he's going to be an everyday first baseman, if he is healthy, Pete Fatsy, their hitting coach, who rarely puts numbers on players, told me the other day, I don't see a reason why he can't hit 30. So that's a big number, right? Wilyer Abreu has made a significant year 1 to year 2 stride in the big leagues in terms of his power. There's a lot of raw power there for Wilyer Abreu. Roman Anthony, you probably should measure what you view as his 50th percentile projection. But gosh, I don't think it would surprise anyone to see him become an absolute monster based on the quality of his approach. And when you saw the adjustments that he was making down the stretch last year, where there were a few mechanical adjustments that seemed to really allow him to clear out some pitches on the inner half of the plate and just send them into orbit. That's a guy who it would surprise no one, no observer of the game, if he ends up hitting 25 or even 30 home runs as like this big, strong 22-year-old. So is it a problem? It would be a problem, I think, if the Red Sox don't have anyone who's a legitimate 25 to 30 home run hitter, right? Like I looked at this question. There has not been a World Series team since the 2015 Royals that failed to feature at least one 30 home run hitter. I guess 2020, but let's flush 2020 for any number of reasons. But last year, the Blue Jays got to Game 7, and George Springer barely got to 30 home runs, and Vladdy was not a 30 home run hitter last year, and yet we wouldn't have said that their lineup was necessarily power deficient. So there's an upside play that the Red Sox are making with their lineup, which is part of the reason why I think why their lineup feels very unfamiliar. It's been a while since you didn't have someone who looked the part of being a true middle-of-the-order anchor, but at the same time, if you get a bunch of guys who hit 20 homers, then, the absence of a true 30, 35 home run threat, you're probably okay.
And there are other extra base hits. They don't bring as many bases, but the Red Sox do have 4 of the top 27 projected doubles hitters, and they have a couple top triples hitters. Jarren Duran projected to be the 3rd best triples hitter and 7th best doubles hitter. So the monster giveth and the monster taketh away, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean it's a great park for extra base hits because you can miss hit balls or guys who don't hit the ball very hard can still rattle the monster with some frequency. Carlos Narvaez was very adept at doing so last year. You don't have to hit the ball that hard in order to be able to have it clanging off of the big green thing in left field. So if you have a sufficient number of right-handed hitters, then you should be able to do something pretty good there. And it's been interesting just to watch Caleb Durbin, who's kind of funky in terms of his how his swing works, to see some of the ways that he's tinkering with contact point and all of that stuff, and what he might be able to do over the course of this season. I don't know what he's going to be able to do, but it's kind of fun to think about what's the power ceiling for a dude who ABS just measured at 5'6" 1/4 inches.
Yeah, he is not a tall guy, but he is a fast guy. You talked about sort of opportunistic approach at times, but what about Durbin was so appealing to the front office? What did they go get for their third base troubles?
The Red Sox last year were kind of awful at times when it came to runners in scoring position, putting the ball in play. They failed a lot to capitalize on that most basic of situations, the man on third and fewer than 2 outs. They were not a good team in terms of converting there. The strikeout rate was very high in those kinds of situations. The strikeout rate was very high with runners in scoring position. The strikeout rate was very high. That's not great at Fenway Park, right? You're rewarded so much, especially for right-handed hitters putting the ball in play. And so you get a guy like Caleb Durbin, who has one of the highest contact rates in Major League Baseball. Well, that can play at Fenway, right? He's right-handed. He puts the ball in play. And the Red Sox believe that he is a guy who, throughout the course of his professional career, has been capable of pulling the ball in the air. So there's a whole lot of talk about air pull going on with the Red Sox right now, particularly among their right-handed hitters. And, whether or not that's it's not a sellout for power because they're perfectly happy with the idea of getting some doubles, but they view Durbin as being a guy who brings an interesting balanced skill set, who's very capable at third base. Maybe could be they're still trying to figure out whether or not Durbin or Marcelo Meyer is better suited for which one of them would be better suited for third base, which one for second base, and how that'll all fit together. But they view both of them as being capable infielders, which was another big area of emphasis for the Red Sox this offseason, because there were times last year where they featured really for many years, the Red Sox have struggled with so many guys looking miscast at different positions in the infield. And so now the Red Sox have guys who look cast. Right. That's part of the reason why they spent money on a guy like Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, because they wanted to establish a really, really solid floor in terms of what their infield defense looked like, because they've seen what it looks like when there is no defensive floor on the infield, and it's pretty bad.
Well, one player who still is not quite in a position that makes sense, or any position for that matter, is someone whose work I quite enjoy, Masataka Yoshida. It's hard for me to see where he fits. And that's not a new state of affairs for him on this roster, but it's just tough to find playing time and have him not block anyone, because you've got the makings of just a great defensive outfield and young homegrown guys. And you've got Abreu and you've got Anthony and you have Ceddanne Rafaela, hopefully sticking in center field now and not being bounced between the infield and outfield. And then you have Duran, who's still around, and you have Wilson Contreras, who will presumably be playing some first, but might also DH. And then Duran is DH. I mean, where and how does Yoshida fit into this picture? Because it seems like there are teams that could use Masataka Yoshida, but it doesn't seem like the Red Sox are one of those teams.
There's a bit of a logjam. Last year, they had a reminder that a logjam isn't a terrible thing to have. They didn't.
Yes, a logjam never lasts.
Right, yeah. Right. Because, Wilyer Abreu and Roman Anthony both end up missing the last month of the season, and Yoshida is a lineup regular again. So Contreras is mostly going to play first base. Like, he was an above-average defensive first baseman last year, transitioned very well there, and one of the things that they wanted to do was shore up their first base defense, because that was, again, another one of their real problems last year. So now in Contreras, they feel like they have someone who's able to do that. He'll get most of his playing time at first base with the occasional day at DH maybe. But yeah, I think that you have successfully identified this weird situation where 3 outfield spots plus DH and 5 players to fill those with the very group that you have. So yeah, it does feel inefficient, at least, I guess, for them to carry all 5 of those players with Yoshida and Duran being the ones who, where you just kind of keep expecting like something probably should give here, but as was the case last year, they're probably not going to force it. But, when you talk to people around the game, certainly like the number of teams that suggest that Duran was available is pretty high. And much higher, like they weren't really open to dealing Abreu this offseason. They weren't really discussing Rafaela, certainly not talking about Anthony. So yeah, I think that they are very open to spring training conversations involving either Yoshida or Duran.
Yeah, that does sort of surprise me, though, that there have been so many Duran rumors, because Duran is very good. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe
like
he's not
in a down year from his, like, obviously 2024 was a very special year for him in terms of a career peak. But yeah, in a significant, like in a year where he leveled off from that significantly, he nonetheless was their best player through a critical stretch over the course of 6, and one of the best players in baseball over a 6-week period. Yeah. And on top of that, still ended up with like 70 extra base hits, which is a lot.
Right. And yeah, even if he's not what he was in 2024, just an excellent player. And Yoshida is a very different, I mean, as, defensively limited and not even as good a hitter probably. And so that's the kind of contract that a team like the Red Sox, in theory, they could just kind of eat that if they needed to, or trade him to someone who could maybe absorb a little bit of the contract, get a prospect back, something like that. It wouldn't be that big a deal. It wouldn't really hurt the team's projections very much. But subtracting Duran, it would. Now, if they had to trade Duran for a starting pitcher or something, then okay, they needed that. But they managed to fill that need with Gray and Suarez without having to trade Duran. So he doesn't seem like he should be expendable, or okay, you have maybe one more player than you have positions, but it's not really kind of, equal when you're talking about Duran versus Yoshida.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like Yoshida, you can take a very broad-minded approach to getting value back. I don't think that they want to just cut bait with the contract, because they still think that the dude can hit. He had a nice finishing kick to the season. It had been a long slog for him to get healthy again. He still theoretically has offensive value to the point where you don't necessarily want him just as a giveaway, but they're probably going to hold out until there's some kind of value in return, much as like they, maybe aiming a little higher than what they did with Jordan Hicks, right? Like where the White Sox absorbed some of the money and there was a pitching prospect that ends up coming back. But you can be very open-minded about the value that you would be getting back for Yoshida, while also holding out maybe for a team that's willing to take on some of the money. Whereas with Duran, I think that the bar has to be pretty high in order to move him. But in his case, they were looking to address, it wasn't just broad-based, like, what is the most we can get for Jarren Duran? It was like, can we use Jarren Duran to address an area of need? Whether that was exploring the trademark, like what kind of trade value he might have for a pitcher or for an infielder. And when that didn't materialize, then they went a non-Duran route in terms of what they were willing to give up in order to acquire Caleb Durbin. So yeah, I think that they're in very different trade buckets. I think that they just thought that Duran was going to allow them to address a team need. Ultimately, he wasn't. And so you would rather have like a super high floor in your depth than just okay, we'll trade him away for a guy who's going to help in 2 years.
I feel like we should talk about Roman Anthony just a little bit more. You mentioned the adjustments that he was starting to make before the injury sidelined him. First of all, is he fully healthy and good to go? And what do you imagine him sort of focusing on this season as he tries to, become one of those guys that makes Red Sox fans calm down? You don't need to calm down. Very stressed.
Yeah, I think that the baseline that he established in the big leagues was kind of crazy good. When you're talking about a 21-year-old making it up to the big leagues, who's getting on base at almost a 400 clip. Like, he was in total command of his at-bats as a guy making his debut. It was pretty special to watch how the plate discipline worked. And I think that he's someone, I was talking about this with some of the people who are around him in AAA, like the introduction of the ABS for someone like him, who does seem to have elite strike zone recognition, could lend itself to some like real outlier things in terms of just on-base abilities. And then that obviously, like, he should be in a pretty good spot to force pitchers to funnel pitches into the zone and into places where he can handle them, because he's a really bright, young hitting mind. He's super interesting to me. He's been super interesting to cover, not only because he emerged as an elite prospect, but because he was kind of the first major data darling prospect that I covered, where in 2023, his first full professional season, he was in low A Salem, and his numbers on paper looked kind of trashy. They were like 220 batting average and low to mid 300s OBP, like super low slugging numbers. Big park, so that was suppressing some of the stuff. But he was the first guy where I was getting this feedback from both inside and outside the Red Sox organization of this guy is making unbelievable swing decisions and he's hitting the ball insanely hard at a very young age. And these are the components that could lend themselves to being a spectacular prospect. And and so it was kind of like this. There was a prospect leap of faith that wasn't happening in games, but where he was one of the first guys who was really popping, where his underlying stuff was popping way in advance of his actual production. All of that stuff has remained very consistent. The underlying swing decisions and how hard he hits the ball has been elite straight through his development. And so the real issue for the last couple of years has been just turning a lot of those hard hit rockets that are 110 plus miles an hour, getting them off the ground and not getting as much grass clippings, and instead turning that into threats on bleachers. And so I think that ball flight has been a big point of emphasis for him, which is why some of those mechanical adjustments he was making last year in order to create kind of a cleaner path to the ball and a little bit more space with his hands away from his body. The fact that there was some very interesting production last August where he had hit 2 home runs in his first 50-ish games, and then all of a sudden hit 6 in a 20 to 30 game span before his season-ending oblique injury. It was oh, that's awfully interesting to see. Whether or not that's a blip or whether or not that's a signal. There's, you're certainly curious to figure that thing out. So if he's able to combine, though, that wonderful sense of the pitches that he can handle and, with a really advanced approach at the plate and an ability to hit the ball really hard with the ability to not hit the ball hard into the ground, then, you're talking about one of the better power on base combinations in baseball.
Well, that's the 21-year-old. Let's talk about the 2 aged 23-year-olds. Marcelo Meyer, you mentioned there's some uncertainty about which position he will play, but tell us how he can improve his performance at the plate in particular. And then Christian Campbell, how and when and where might he fit into the picture?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of how and when and where with both of them because Meyer still has, as we talk today on Thursday, February 26th. Meyer has yet to play in a game this spring. He's been kind of doing a lot more behind the scenes work as he's worked back from wrist surgery that ended his season last year, and I think that there's also been some purposeful training work that's based on the thing that has been his area of emphasis throughout his minor league career, which is swing decisions and then also some pitch recognition stuff that's resulted in his swing and miss rate has been pretty high, especially against lefties. There's a big question about, is this a dude who's going to be able to be an everyday player, or is he going to be a platoon guy? He hasn't really gotten the opportunity at the major league level to figure that out or to learn and then to prove one way or the other what he is. But there's an open question about whether or not, assuming that he's in an infield with Durbin, whether he'll be at second base or third base. He's really good at third base. His reactions and clock are fantastic defensively there. And I think he has a chance to be at least above average to plus third base defender. Second base, to be determined. He really hasn't played that much, but he's got great game feel that would allow him to have clear defensive value no matter where he's playing. But, that offensive adjustment, the ability to limit his swings and misses and to make contact, that's going to be the big question that faces him. He has a lot of strength. This could be a guy who there are a lot of different directions that his offensive profile can go. When he was first drafted, I thought that he was going to be hit over power, and I thought that he had a kind of looseness and adjustability at the plate that would allow him to shoot the ball line to line while also occasionally turning on balls. And I was like, oh, maybe he's a 15 to 20 homer guy with a ton of doubles. And it seems like he's leaned hard into being more of a pull power hitter, where you can see a path to him being lower average, lower OBP, maybe higher strikeout totals, but getting more to be that 20 to 25 homer guy as an infielder with considerable value. But he's very much a work in progress. He's still learning, and there kind of needs to be permission for him to have some growth as a hitter. Campbell, there's not a clear path for him onto the big league roster right now, especially absent a trade of one of the guys we were talking about earlier, in Duran and Yoshida. They're still tinkering with the idea of, they're mostly giving him time in the outfield in spring training because that's where he's had less exposure throughout his professional career, and giving themselves some depth there is that makes a lot of sense. I think it's still an open question whether or not he would be better suited for the outfield or better suited for second base. If you gave him a couple of years at second base, I think he could probably handle it pretty reasonably. He could probably be a 45 to 50 grade defensive second baseman if you gave him a lot of runway there. The problem is, it's hard to give him that runway if you view the bat as being available to the big league team right now. He's a puzzling one where it feels like the different parts of his game they weren't quite developing in concert where it would be easy to just find the right timing for getting him up to the big leagues. It does feel like last year was a little bit too fast, even though, boy, last April he was the American League Rookie of the Month and looked in pretty good command of his at-bats. But right now I think that the Red Sox are probably in a position where they're pretty comfortable with the idea of if he starts in AAA, that's okay. And I think that that's probably the likeliest path for the beginning of his season.
When they made the move for Carlos Narvaez last offseason, so December of 2024, it struck me more as sort of a curiosity because it's always funny when the Red Sox and the Yankees trade with each other because it doesn't happen very often. That ended up being a pretty consequential move for them when it was all said and done because of Connor Wong. Yeah. And now Elmer Rodriguez is a top 100 prospect, but Connor Wong got injured. He didn't have a particularly great year at the plate, and Narvaez was basically a league average hitter and was defensively sound. So talk to us about sort of how he fits in for them, and is this the version of Narvaez they thought they were getting when they swung that trade?
What they thought was that he was going to be defensively excellent. It was interesting. He was one of the first guys where it's great that Baseball Savant allows us to play around with things like shadow zone called strike rates in AAA, because his was, after they made the trade, I was like, oh, what's this profile? I don't know. Let's start looking at some of the data. And it was oh, I see. He's multiple standard deviations better than better than league average in terms of being able to steal strikes and get shadow zone strikes that are in the zone called strikes. So he was clearly an elite framer. They were well aware of that. They have a lot of people from the Yankees player development system who also had history with Narvaez, and so they knew what they were getting defensively. I do not think that they realized necessarily what they were going to be getting offensively, which is like the idea that he was a league average hitter as a catcher who was delivering above average defense. Like that was, I think that they thought they were getting a complimentary catcher rather than someone who was going to be taking who was going to get an opportunity thanks to a very early season injury to Connor Wong and just never relinquish it.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about the projections being a bit dubious about the power potential of the Red Sox bats, but the projections are quite high on the Red Sox arms, specifically the rotation, which has not been a strength for the Red Sox of late, but they have bolstered it this offseason. They have extended Garrett Crochet. He is great. They've got Gray. They've got, I'm just going to say Suarez to be safe. That part, at least, we can be pretty confident in. They've got Bayo, who bounced back a bit. They have brought in Johan Oviedo. They still have a whole lot of other options lying around here. There's depth in addition to top-end talent. And I guess that's my question, since it doesn't seem as if there are a whole lot of doubts about the top guys here. Maybe you could talk about the historical idea that, lefties in Fenway, and whether that's actually something to worry about in Suarez's case or not. But I am curious really about the rest of the group, because that top three seems just about peerless, and top four and even top five. It's quite strong. But then how do you find time for Peyton Tolley? How do you work in Connolly early? These are promising young pitchers too. And like the problem with the logjam, this may sort itself out, because the saying, you can never have enough outfielders. No, that's not it. It's you can never have enough pitchers. Some guys will get hurt. They'll need that depth. But whom do you think would be the next men up?
It's a really interesting one, because like you didn't even mention a couple of guys, Patrick Sandoval and Cutter Crawford, are kind of kicking around here. They're a little bit behind the rest of the group. So you would kind of guess that they're going to start on the injured list, but they're not too far behind. They're probably going to be there's a pretty decent chance that they're on rehab assignments at the beginning of the year in AAA, but available as short-term depth. So yeah, this is after they traded Hunter Dobbins and Richard Fitz and and Kyle Harrison, right? Like all of those guys profiled as potential, as like you can see like paths for all of those guys to be big league starting pitchers as well, even though they're more in that kind of like 5-6 mold right now. Yeah, so it's been a very interesting and very intentional buildup on the part of Craig Breslow, former major league pitcher. So you do wonder how much. I've never really looked at it from this, I wonder what, whether or not Chris Young is super obsessed with continually adding more starters. But certainly they've added a lot, and they're going to. So they have their front four that you pointed out with Crochet and Suarez and Bayo and Sonny Gray. And I think that they feel pretty good about the way that Gray and Suarez have been able to manage contact throughout their careers. It will be interesting, I think, with Suarez, who he is someone who is more of a contact manager than he is a pure swing and miss guy. Lineups against him are very heavily right-handed. He's a day off for a lot of left-handed hitters. And so how is that going to play at Fenway Park? That'll be interesting, but I think that they feel pretty good about his command being so good that he'll be able to force right-handed hitters to kind of use the bigger part of the park at Fenway, where there are a lot of outs to be had. And I think that they really wanted to lean hard in the ABS year into guys who did have excellent control and command. And so in Suarez and Gray, they got a couple of them. Who are really going to be able to who are among the best at working to the edges of the zone. Bayo was an opening day starter for them a couple of years ago, and he's now their number 4. And he was a guy who was good last year, even without his best pitch. He just lost feel for his changeup last year. And that's his swing and miss weapon. So he wasn't missing bats last year, but he kind of figured out how to be something of a game manager, contact manager, to be a pretty effective big league starter over the course of a full season. He now feels like his changeup is in a better place. We'll see. But that is to your point, a very solid front four. And then they can let the rest kind of take care of itself through competition and injuries and the whole thing. But you're right, to have Oviedo and as a right-handed option who has power stuff, as well as lefties who are both, who are young in Tolley and Early, as well as a veteran like Sandoval, as well as a guy who a couple of years ago was a pretty decent number 4 starter in Cutter Crawford. That's a lot of options and a lot of depth to have. It permits them potentially to make more trades as the season progresses, and as other guys in their organization who are a little further away, like a Kyson Witherspoon, maybe start to emerge.
And of course, some of those guys could potentially filter their way down to a bullpen that desperately needs reinforcement because it only ranks 5th by our estimation. Obviously, Chapman is back. Whitlock, a lot of these guys are the same, although there is some new blood via trade and free agency. So walk us through the pen and how guys sort of stack up in front of Chapman and Whitlock.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because it's super heavily right-handed. Chapman is the left-handed guy in their bullpen right now, and no one else. They did acquire Tyler Samaniego from the Pirates, but he's been behind a little bit with injuries, and he's never pitched. He's never pitched in the big leagues. So that one's an open question. They have Giovanni Moran, who has some big league service time, was pretty good with the Twins a couple of years ago before undergoing Tommy John, but he's also a reverse splits guy because he's very heavy on his changeup usage. So it's not exactly like the lockdown left on left option. So they continue to explore left-handed options. They do have the fallback of thinking about guys like Tolley or Early, but that would be that's not ideal to take the young guys and to shuttle them between roles while they're figuring out how to be starting pitchers in AAA, let alone the big leagues. Sandoval is a kind of interesting, expensive, potentially left-handed bullpen option, maybe a multi-innings option if it comes to that. But I think that that would be, I think that they would rather figure out some way of seeing more fully what his value would be as a starter, whether it's for them or for someone else. They also have Greg Weissert, who was kind of low key, very good for them in a middle innings role last year as a right-handed, low 3/4 slot right-handed pitcher who should be. He strangely had reverse splits last year, even though the way that he slings the ball suggests that he should be better as a right-on-right option. But he ended up being a nice middle reliever for them. They've got a depth of arms, a variety of looks coming out of the bullpen. But Zach Kelly is someone who has an arsenal that should work against batters of both-handedness. Justin Slayton is someone who has really good right-on-right stuff. At times, it looks like he should have good stuff to handle lefties as well. So they have a lot of good arms. It is a little bit weird seeing the kind of asymmetry. My colleague Tim Healy at the Globe wrote an article about Craig Breslow has not yet found his Craig Breslow for this Boston Red Sox team. They don't have that kind of middle innings left-handed option, which is a small blind spot to have, I suppose.
Well, as long as Suarez doesn't have to face Konnor Griffin too many times, these pitching should be solid. Is it too soon to say whether Breslow has developed the pitching factory that he set out to?
Well, I think it's not too soon. And part of that is just where are you plowing your, put your money where your mouth is, right? The Red Sox for years and years said they wanted to develop a pitching pipeline. Well, it's a nice thing to say it, but when you don't ever take pitchers in the first 2 or sometimes 5 rounds of the draft, it's going to be really hard to develop really good frontline pitchers. And when you don't trade for young pitchers, then it's going to be really hard to develop frontline pitchers. And I think that they've done some things in terms of pitcher development where they've systematically gotten gains out of a bunch of guys, right? The organization-wide introduction of velocity programs, that's making gains. Like you see Peyton Tolley going from a guy who worked at like 92 in college to being a guy who was sitting, 96 as a starter and then working above that as a reliever at the end of last year. Like you see it with guys who they drafted last year, like Anthony Ianson is a guy they took in the third round last year, really good pitchability guy at LSU who went in the third round. He was sitting like 91, 90, like let's call it like 91 to 94 in college. Like this year in live BPs, he's holding 95 to 97. And so it's like, okay, we see what you're doing there. Their pitcher development program is kind of like they're achieving some widespread gains through what they're doing behind the scenes, but they're also just using a lot more of they're paying a lot more attention to getting pitchers in the system who already come with some pretty significant attributes. Like they spent a lot of years not drafting pitchers in the early rounds, and so Tolley was their highest draft pick. In 2024, Tolley was a second rounder. He was their highest draft pick of a pitcher since Tanner Houck in 2017, and then last year. They ended up taking Kyson Witherspoon in the first round, and they ended up taking another pitcher, Marcus Phillips, in the comp round A, and another pitcher, Ianson, in the third round. So they're clearly devoting a lot more attention to creating the pitching factory, and that's the strength of their system now. It's flipped around really quickly.
All right. Well, what is a realistic outcome that would constitute success for the Red Sox this year? What would it take to make the people in Pete Abe's mentions and replies satisfied? Maybe those are two different questions, really.
Yeah.
but what would constitute success for the Red Sox in 2026?
Yeah, let's avoid trying to speculate on what the root causes of happiness are. Let's maybe going to a museum, like art is always a good place to begin when you you seek to find happiness. But I would say that they are an organization that should be taking progressive steps forward. So they made it to the playoffs last year for the first time since 2021. I'm a believer in the idea of kind of those building arcs. That doesn't no religious connotations intended. But I looked at the homegrown group of 2018 and like how that year over year was building up into something. So to me, and I think to a lot of people, make it deeper than the wild card round. Like get October baseball back to Fenway Park. I think that would be a pretty significant step forward, particularly when you think about having a young group that is. It's not like this is the last dance for a group that's together, right? Like you have Roman Anthony and Garrett Crochet for a number of years. You have something that should be on an upward trajectory that you're building around if you're the Red Sox. And so the success is measured in taking further steps forward.
Well, we'll see if they can do that. We'll see if prospect Justin Gonzalez grows anymore by the end of the year. You've been tracking his height, which keeps increasing. He's up
so
to
does his weight. Yeah. I mean, so like I saw David. I'll share this. I ran into David Ortiz today. We were talking about Justin Gonzalez, and David Ortiz pointed to like a large, one of the large like refrigerators that are around with, keeping lots of bottled beverage, like lots of rehydration stations, right? And he was like, that dude, like I gave him a hug and it felt like I was hugging that thing. And he pointed to the refrigerator. 6'6", 277 right now. And he got into a big league game today. And he hit a ball. It was a line drive that was right to the shortstop, but it was 110 off the bat. So he's an interesting 19-year-old, to be sure.
Yeah, not quite Aaron Judge or Spencer Jones size, but getting there for sure.
I mean, 1 inch and 5 pounds off of Judge. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, Alex Speier, you heard him. He's a philosopher. He's a deep thinker. He's a great speaker, and we are always happy to talk to him and to read him at the Boston Globe. Thanks as always, Alex.
Thank you for sharing your profundities, and you may now stop complimenting me. The rest of this podcast can now be insults, please.
Well, there might be some insults because we're about to preview the Cincinnati Reds, so we'll be back in just a moment with Trent Rosecrans, another of our perennial previewers, to talk about the Reds.
Effectively Wild, where we can talk about Ohtani all day long. Effectively Wild, with Ben and Nick on a mic, you know it's gonna be a good time. I wanna learn about new statistics. I wanna hear about none them RBIs, yeah. Tell me about some prospect I should know about. Effectively Wild. Effectively Wild. Effectively Wild. Effectively Wild.
Well, we pretend not to talk about the Reds. It's a podcast meme, which is born out of truth. It contains a kernel of truth. Perhaps we have underserved the Reds over the years that this podcast existed. But then again, have the Reds deserved as much podcast time as many other franchises? We will discuss that in just a moment with our preview guest, our perennial preview guest, a senior writer for The Athletic who covers the Reds, C. Trent Rosecrans. Hello, Trent.
Hello, guys.
You cover the Reds full time. No one could accuse you of ignoring the Reds. That's for sure. So,
correct.
I don't know whether you believe that the Reds are undercovered by national media or baseball podcasts specifically, or whether you think that they just haven't done enough to seize the nation's attention.
Yeah, I'm sure truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
right?
Probably. Yeah. But we're going to get into everything that the Reds did and didn't do this offseason. And actually, we have a couple of listener submitted questions for you specifically.
Uh-oh.
So we will relay those. They're not about you, really. They're about
good.
the Reds. But nonetheless, maybe we could start with the way last year ended or shortly before it ended. There was some good news, which was that the Reds returned to the playoffs. Easy to forget that, perhaps, because it didn't last very long, and it didn't develop until very late in the season. And I guess you couldn't say that the Reds exactly stormed the gates and seized that playoff spot and went on an incredible spree. It was maybe more just that no one else was playing particularly well, and the Mets were playing particularly poorly. Nonetheless, they were presented with an opportunity and they took it. How was that regarded by the organization, by the players, by the fan base who hadn't seen the Reds in the playoffs in a while? Was this, hey, success, mission accomplished, we made it? Or was it, oh, this is a tantalizing taste of something that we wish we could sample more regularly and for a lot longer than that?
Yeah, because, you look at it and it wasn't at home, right?
Yeah, that too.
They haven't played a home playoff game since 2012, because in 2013 was in Pittsburgh, the one-game playoff back when we had those. And then in 2020, it was 2020, and that was in Atlanta. This is a franchise that has not won a postseason series since 1995. That's a long time.
It is. Yes, that has something to do with the lack of podcast coverage over that span, which has largely overlapped with the Reds not being that great.
Yeah, and so it's understandable. I think there will be a lot of excitement when there is a playoff game here. Also, when the team advances in the playoffs for the first time since Barry Larkin was in uniform. And Barry Larkin has been in the Hall of Fame for quite a while now. Mm-hmm. So it is something to watch. But, it's funny. This was a team that had zero expectations in 2023 and well exceeded those in the playoff hunt to the last couple of days with a influx of young talent. Then it was a disappointing 2024, which cost David Bell his job. From there, you go to 2025, where you have a new manager and Terry Francona, and you're hoping for better, and they sneak into the playoffs. And I don't think anybody is going to apologize for the Mets collapse. But, also remember, this is a team they played head-to-head in the last month, and then the Reds took that series. So that was a big point. You can say that series meant the playoffs between the Reds and the Mets, and well, the Reds took advantage, right? So all that's to be said is I think there are higher expectations, and no one is going to celebrate anything less than, I mean, not that that's a huge deal, but when something hasn't happened in 31 years, it is a pretty big deal that it's not going to feel like success until they advance in the playoffs.
This is a respectable club, and so it feels a little silly to say that their fortunes sort of rise and fall with any one player. But I think if we were going to pin that set of expectations to any guy, it would probably be Elly De La Cruz. It seems like it makes good sense to start with him. And what an odd season he seemed to have, right? His availability down the stretch was clearly important to them. He also seemed obviously compromised at stretches. So talk to us about the season that was for Elly last year, and then sort of what you're expecting out of him this year, because it wasn't like he had a bad year. He was almost a 4.5 win player by our reckoning of WAR, but he also wasn't the almost 7 win player that he was in 2024. So talk to us about the 2025 version of Elly, and then what we might expect to see from him this season.
Well, I think the biggest part were the leg injuries, and he downplayed them during the season, and he actually downplayed them going forward. However, the team said, they were a factor, and you could tell. I mean, when you watch Elly De La Cruz run and it's not like awe-inspiring, that means his legs probably aren't healthy, and they are right now. Honestly, here's the thing I always look for. When he's running and rounding the bases, if he's at like a 45-degree angle, his body, he's feeling good. And if it's more straight up, he's not. It's something that you can actually see next time you guys watch him run. And when he is at his best, he's rounding the bases and he's just fighting centrifugal force. So it is quite a difference. And I think last year there was a lot of that I want to play every day, which is what you want from your players, right?
Right.
But there's the fine line of where are you and are you helping the team? And the problem was 50% Elly is still pretty good, or replacement level, or better than anything else you have, especially when Matt McLain is struggling, because that's the other option at shortstop. And Matt McLain had that rough post-shoulder surgery year that most guys with shoulder injuries have. So, there just wasn't that much. And I think it was really important to Elly to play 162. I mean, it was so important that he barely played in 162 because he missed the start of a game when his flight back from his sister's funeral in the Dominican Republic was postponed and delayed, and he wasn't able to make it to the game on time or even that day. And that game got suspended and was continued the next day. And he was, by that time, back and went into the lineup. So, I mean, like that's how important it was for him to play every day.
Yeah, it's ironic, I guess, because I never want to miss a single podcast, but I do think that there is some virtue in taking a day off if you're a player, especially if you're injured, is the thing. I mean, it's one thing if you're healthy, that will wear you down, but if you're playing with a significant physical restriction that clearly is hampering your performance, and yes, you're right, maybe they just didn't have great alternatives. I remember we talked about this late last season before we even knew all the details about what was going on with him. And it was clear that something was, just without even seeing him and studying the angle at which he is bent over running, just looking at the numbers, because he was on pace to have another sterling season. And then suddenly he was playing really roughly replacement level for a pretty extended stretch. And I wonder if he had known and they had known in advance somehow that he would be that bad, that he would struggle that much. Maybe it would have been better to sit him. I guess it's hard to say you would do anything differently because they did end up making the playoffs just barely. But I don't know that he helped all that much during that part. And this leads me to one of the questions that we got for you, because you mentioned Barry Larkin. He is, of course, the heir to Barry Larkin's position. We talk a lot about him as a base runner and as a hitter, but he is a defender too, and that's part of what makes him so valuable, at least in theory. And the defensive stats were decent last year, but we got this question from Joseph, who says, when you do the Reds preview, I think it might be interesting to hear from C. Trent about what to expect from Ellie's defense, specifically if we might see him get the errors under control. One thing I heard a lot on the broadcast after Brian Hayes got traded was how every single throw he made was perfectly chest high to the first baseman. And when I was watching, it looked like his throws were always low effort. And when I've seen Ellie airmail balls, it's because he's throwing it as hard as he can. I think the last 2 months of the season, though, Ellie looked like he was airing it out less. So I'm wondering if he's been working some with Hayes to shore up the defense, or maybe that was him airing it out. He was just hurt. maybe the injury made him better. Sometimes you'll hear a pitcher say, oh yeah, I couldn't do this, so I had to adjust my delivery. And sometimes that hurts them. Sometimes it helps in a weird way. Anyway, Ellie is the reason we talk about the Reds first and foremost on Effectively Wild. So how much they are discussed closely correlated with how well Ellie is playing. So tell us about his defensive acumen and outlook.
Yeah, I think, if you look at it, Barry Larkin, his first full year in the big leagues, he led the league in errors as well. Mm-hmm. And I think there is something to be said for getting comfortable. Brian Hayes, Matt McClain, I think it's part of the maturation process of Ellie De La Cruz. It's knowing when you need to use that arm that can throw it 100 miles an hour and when you need to just work on it. I don't know that it's going to be specifically said or pointed out or whatever. I'm sure it has been. But watching Brian Hayes and seeing that, I think has to rub off because Ellie's a really smart baseball player. It's one of the things that his gifts physically tend to, overshadow what an instinctual baseball player he is and what a intelligent baseball player he is. And I think this is all just part of that maturation process. And I expect those numbers to go down, but I also think when you look at it, and I know you guys have, you look at it and he still is a plus defender, even with the errors. And I think it's just going to be evening it out and getting into that spot.
You mentioned Hayes, and he sort of presents opposite is too strong as it pertains to Ellie, but sort of an opposite problem where you're not at all worried about Brian Hayes' defense. It is his carrying tool. It is why he is a big leaguer at the moment. And he did hit better in Cincy than he did in Pittsburgh. But I think that the Reds are probably still hoping on some improvement on an 82 WRC plus, even if it's just getting to league average. So talk to us about the initial Brian Hayes experience. And are there things that the Reds are telling him to do to try to get the bat to look something like the defense?
Yeah, and I think that was something they had some ideas of what could work. And when he came over at the trade deadline. So it was more like, hey, here's some ideas, but we don't want to overwhelm you. And I think they think there is more. They think there can be a league average type hitter in there. And if you have a league average type hitter, or even a little less, hitting 9, you take that. And I think there were some, there were some little changes. I got to find it here because I remember looking at it the other day, and they were subtle, but they were changes to kind of how he was, not pulling the ball, I believe, as much. There was a lot of those little things that really helped. And I think also the pressure is off. He was in Pittsburgh. He was the guy with the biggest contract they'd ever signed at the time. There was a lot of expectations. They wanted him to really be like a power hitter and do a lot of things. And the Reds are just kind of more like, hey, we don't need you to carry this team. You're just a guy, and it's easy to get lost behind Ellie De La Cruz. And for some people, that's a bad thing. And for some people, and I think it might be with Brian Hayes, that's a good thing.
Let's talk about a guy who used to play some third base for the Reds, but I imagine will not be anymore. But that's Eugenio Suarez, who is back in Cincinnati. And I'm glad because it gives us something to say about the Reds offseason, at least, which was quite quiet. There were a couple of relievers. There was J.J. Bleday. Is any of that getting you excited? Probably not. But they did swoop in and bring back Eugenio, who gives them some power, certainly. So I assume that he will just be the mainstay at DH for them. But what are they hoping for? That he ended up signing a much shorter term, smaller dollar deal than a lot of people had forecasted. So I wonder what, if anything, you heard about his market.
Well, I know he took less money to come here. You know, even when he was in Arizona with Arizona earlier in the year and he came here, he talked about how much his family loved it here. I believe his in-laws or his parents and maybe a sibling still live in the Cincinnati area. This was, you know, I know every fan base is like, oh my gosh, they signed him for this. Mm-hmm. Why didn't we do that? And just as Kyle Schwarber probably could have gotten more money but wanted to stay in Philly, Eugenio Suarez, when he looked at the options, this is where he wanted to be. The crazy stat, the Reds still play at Great American Ballpark, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the place, but it has a reputation of being a pretty good place to hit home runs. What is crazy is the last time a Reds player hit more than 25 home runs, that was 2021 when Joey Votto, Nick Castellanos, and Eugenio Suarez all did it. And Eugenio had 31 home runs that year. That was under his two bad years when the Reds then traded him, and he was not the headliner in that deal. That was Jesse Winker. So, you know, you kind of look back on it, and 31 homers was like, okay, well, we can get rid of this guy. And they haven't had anyone hit that since. Last year, how many did he have at the All-Star break? I mean, I think it was 30-some. So if Eugenio Suarez can duplicate that bad year and have 31 home runs, that's more than any Red has had since Joey Votto had 36 in 2021.
I'll ask you about Votto a little later, but I'll stick with the theme of third base and former third baseman. Talk about another guy who played some third base for the Reds last year, but then switched positions. And that's Noelvi Marte, and he did not grade out well as a third baseman, but as an outfielder, seemed like he really took to it, and the stats were pretty positive. He obviously made a huge season-saving, season-making potentially catch in late September. So tell us about that conversion, because the Reds really, they have a history in recent years of trying to make infielders into outfielders and just moving people around, and then those guys not flourishing. And I don't know whether that's because they've been asked to play a bunch of positions and they haven't been able to commit to one or not. But in this case, at least, it seems to have gone swimmingly so far.
Yeah, I mean, like the thing is Noelvi's a really good athlete. He's going to play some center as well. When you look at it, he's one of their faster players. I think his sprint speed last year, and of course Ellie was compromised, but I think he was right above or below Ellie. I don't have that right in front of me. I just remember like they were right there next to each other. But I think what it did more than anything is it let him relax. You know, he was one of those guys who would take his at-bats into the field and his field into the at-bats. And, you know, at third base, it's always on you and your mind's going. The further you get from the ball, the more the game slows down. And I think that slowing down has really helped him. You know, I remember it was one of those things. This is right after the All-Star break. They started playing with it, him and the outfield. It was at Citi Field, and by the end of that series, he's playing the outfield. And he said he had never played the outfield since like Little League-ish age. He was thrown into the fire, and there were some spots where he didn't look great, but he kind of caught on, and it felt like he had a weight off his shoulders, and he could kind of concentrate a little bit more on his hitting. I think it's going to be a good move. He's got the arm, and he's got one of those arms that it was never arm strength, much like we were talking about with Ellie. It was, where it's going. And when you're in the outfield, you throw to an area. In the infield, you throw to a spot. And his arm should play better throwing to an area.
We can kind of keep the potentially former third baseman train going. If I were going to pick a guy, a younger guy on the roster who might undo the 31 homer curse, I think I might point to Sal Stewart, who came up late in the year, top 100 prospect, won't be playing third with Brian Hayes on the roster, but talk to us about the first base conversion and then just what the team is expecting out of the bat, because you want to get excited about a guy with a 124 WRC plus, but you also want to be mindful to not overreact to 58 plate appearances. So what did you see from Sal and what do you expect to see from Sal?
You could look at another guy who had a really, really great call up, even better, honestly, in Christian Encarnacion Strand. And since then, he's kind of dealt with injuries as almost a forgotten guy, even though he's still on the roster. Speaking of big power. But I think the difference is, so much of CES's value comes from when he hits the ball. Whereas Sal Stewart has a much more advanced approach and sense of the strike zone. And that's something that is going to be really interesting to see how he goes forward. And he was a third baseman, and I think most people saw him as a first baseman from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so he came up and he had played like 2 games in the minors at first and then was thrown into the fire at first base, really in the big leagues. So that transition's moving over there. They did sign Nate Lowe to a minor league deal. I mean, and that's a guy who has a gold glove. I think that should help, while they're doing drills and stuff in spring training. And both Sal and Noelvi getting a full spring training, I think, at those positions will be really beneficial. And Sal is also, he transformed his body in the offseason. He looks, there was still some baby fat there, and that's gone this offseason. He worked incredibly hard and is just like his face is leaner. He has done so much work where the body I think is going to be something that he's going to deal with his entire career. But he showed what he was able to do this offseason.
Well, let me ask you before we switch to the pitching, which actually is pretty exciting. The other listener submitted question. We don't usually get pre-preview questions from people. Just people were really excited for this Reds preview or for you specifically, Trent, or they just wanted to remind us to preview the Reds so that we didn't forget to talk about them.
That's probably closest to the
That
truth.
could be it. So this comes from Aaron, who says, I was going to mention this topic a while ago when you were asking for undercovered stories for each team, but as it was by far the biggest issue on Reds Twitter the past year, I didn't bother because I assumed so many others would. I don't think anyone else did. So I'm talking about Terry Francona and hitting coach Chris Valleca's emphasis on contact while downplaying bat speed, hitting the ball hard, etc. Will Benson seems to have been the sacrificial goat, lamb, for this view, as his metrics were pretty good but didn't get much playing time. Whether this was them trying to come to grips with such a poor offensive team or something else, it was just maddening to hear all season and underscores my impression that aside from current pitching coach Derek Johnson, the Reds haven't ever had anyone in the front office or dugout who's been anywhere close to competent when it comes to modern analytics. Would appreciate you asking, see Trent, I hope it's him, it is, about the hitting philosophy as well as the utter bass-ackwardness of this godforsaken franchise. It got a little dark there at the end, but
I think there's a lot of assumptions there.
yeah, maybe so.
You're
saying that something that fans were talking about on a team Twitter was not entirely rooted in fact, but yeah, I assume, again, maybe there's some kernel of truth here, but maybe you could explain the controversy, at least if there was one, if you're aware of this backlash, this strain of thinking.
Hitting coaches are not offensive coordinators. Mm-hmm. You take what's there. Like, you can't make... One of my all-time favorites was back in the day, early, Brooke Jacoby was a Reds hitting coach in the late aughts, maybe early teens. And I remember the late great John Fay, my partner at the Enquirer, the Cincinnati Enquirer. John once asked Brooke, like, okay, so how do you teach someone to be Joey Votto? And Brooke Jacoby said, you don't teach that, you draft it. And so I think that's part of it. They're always looking for what that person can do best. But I also believe that they think that there should be more contact. And I don't know that that is a draconian belief. When you look around the game, I think contact has become more important. There are a lot of people who are very versed in statistical analysis in the Reds front office. I mean, from Nick Kroll all the way down, Sam Grossman, who is in charge of that. Nick Wan is a guy who probably nobody knows who that is, but Nick Wan is a brilliant thinker. Derek Johnson's gone through all this. Valleca is a hitting coach, and they have assistants. And I find it hard to villainize or kind of go to the binary. You're either like early mid-aughts. If you don't believe in on-base percentage, you're dumb and you should be fired kind of dichotomy. So that's a long way of saying they would like guys to put the ball in play a little bit more, but it's not this huge rejection of modern baseball.
I'm curious, this is a team that over the last couple of years has seen its sort of best laid plans curtailed at times due to injury to key starters. Who are some of the guys in the high minors who you think Reds fans should be familiar with if, God forbid, something were to befall one of the guys that they have projected for an everyday role right now?
Hector Rodriguez, I am super high on. I think Hector Rodriguez is going to be a heck of a player. The guy can hit. It's one of those. He's got someone told me that he would swing at the rosin bag if you threw the rosin bag at him, but he would hit it. And he's just one of those guys. The people I've heard him compared to this spring, and all these came with caveats, so it's not like 1-to-1, but I've heard Vladimir Guerrero Sr. because of that. I've heard Carlos Delgado for the way the ball just he catches the ball and it will launch. Luis Ariz for how he is just bat to ball skills. And I've heard Jose Ramirez for, well, I think a lot of it is he's built a lot like Jose Ramirez, but also that ability to hit. I don't know that I expect him to be any of those guys, but if you're getting compared to people, that's four pretty good people to be compared to.
Well, I suppose we should talk about some starting pitching because the Reds have plenty of it, and they are projected to have the 5th best rotation in baseball. It's an exciting group. I don't know if Brady Singer is exciting exactly, but he's good. And
yeah, if he's your 4th starter, you're feeling really good.
Yes, and everyone else is actually pretty exciting. Yeah. I don't know whether to start at the top or toward the bottom, because ostensibly, I guess Chase Burns might sort of be the 5th starter right now, nominally, but he might also end up being the best starter. So
and he could be in Louisville.
Yeah, that too.
I don't think if he's in Louisville, it's anything he did.
Yeah.
To start the season.
I do want to get to Burns. I guess we can talk about the guy who I suppose will be starting opening day. And health permitting, I guess, is always the question. But Hunter Green was excellent when he was pitching last year for the 2nd straight season. He sort of had almost identical stats in some respects, but fewer innings. And he did run into some injury issues. So how is he? And will he be moderating the approach at all? Because I get nervous when someone is sitting 99 plus on their fastball, and I fear the worst. And he was so good in 2024, sort of sitting 97 something. So, just be careful there, Hunter. But yeah, he's excellent. So tell us how he's shaping up.
Yeah, he looks like Hunter. And the big thing for him, I think, has just been the maturation and the idea that, hey, if I throw it in the zone, it's still going to be tough for them to hit. So I don't need to nibble. Don't need to do any of that. I'm just going to throw strikes and do your best. And I think that is when he isn't at the best. And you've seen him go deeper into games and be able to pitch longer in games, get earlier outs. And there will always be those strikeouts. The stuff is so good. The split he's added has really, the last couple of years, has been good enough. It's been about as good as it needs to be. And that's important, that third pitch. It's still very much a third pitch, but when the first two are those, you're feeling okay about that.
Well, we can maybe just keep going down the line here. Some of his breakout is definitely attributable to 4 more starts, but that would be, I think, doing Andrew Abbott a disservice. He struck out more guys. He walked fewer of them. He gave up fewer home runs, better ERA, better FIP. Everything seemed to be going relatively well for Abbott last year and didn't see like a huge velo uptick or anything like that. So tell us about Andrew Abbott and what went right for him in 2025. I
know it sounds maybe like a little too easy. This is the maturation of a pitcher. He's been a guy who was, even in college, that was his MO, right? He was a guy that was just a pitcher and an advanced kind of approach, which we usually say for hitters, but for a pitcher, he is. And I think a lot of it has been getting comfortable. I think Jose Trevino has helped him out there too. It is kind of interesting to watch him. And, he's never going to win on stuff, but he's got good enough stuff. And he's also left-handed, which is very helpful. So, he's a guy that you just, maybe in the future, he's kind of that Brady Singer that you don't get too excited about him, but you're really happy if he's on the mound.
Can't wait any longer. I want to just hear more about Burnes. Please tell us, regale us with how good he's going to be and when and in what capacity.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be a starter. He's worked on his changeup. Again, just that Hunter Green, the difference in Hunter Green. And I even talked to Hunter about that, or maybe it was Chase who told me that, like, Hunter was like, hey, I see what you're doing with your change. You're doing that sooner than I did. And that's good. And that will help you. It's a changeup that he's always kind of played around with. He's made it more of a kick change than the traditional circle. It's really just a pitch that he needs to throw for strikes because, again, like I said with Hunter, that fastball and that slider are elite pitches. And he's a guy that I think has a lot of talent and could be as good as anybody, and that includes Hunter Green. And that's saying quite a bit, It's fun to watch, and I think he's just getting better, and that's good.
I think that, you mentioned that he might end up starting down in AAA. Another guy who I think is ticketed for there right now and who we haven't gotten to see in a while just because of injury is Rhett Lauder. So talk to us about Rhett Lauder. I love Rhett Lauder's hair. You got to have at least one Red with hair that looks like he could be in a Three Musketeers remake. And they got rid of India, so
he could be Xavier's mascot, D'Artagnan.
Yeah, there you go.
I actually kind of have Rhett Lauder as who I think might be the guy who is that fifth starter. It's almost like we were just talking Andrew Abbott and Hunter Green. Same kind of thing. Again, Lauder has really good stuff. It's not that it's not good. It's just not Chase Burnes stuff. And he pitches in uses pitchability or whatever you want to say. He's more of that typical pitching. He does it command, control, and still good stuff. That's why I think, he might, if healthy, I could see him starting this season in Cincinnati and allow Burnes to kind of work on that changeup and that third pitch in AAA. Now, I could be totally wrong because in the end, it's Chase Burnes, right? This guy's really, really good. But Rhett Lauder's pretty darn good too. He's made He made 7 starts in the big leagues and had a 1.19 ERA. That's good. So, yeah, I think it's a guy that there is some real potential. And again, somebody you like. And so then what you do is you're 5 in Cincinnati, if everybody's healthy. And again, we know that's not going to be the case for 162. But if you have Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, Andrew Abbott, Brady Singer, and say Rhett Lauder / Chase Burns in the big league level, that's your rotation. What's really exciting is that in the minors, you have then, let's say, either one of those guys, Burns, Lauder. Then you have Brandon Williamson, who's also coming off TJ, but has looked really good. He's a big, tall lefty who was like the main guy in that Eugenio Suarez, Jesse Winker trade we talked about earlier. And he's got some big league time. You then have Julian Aguiar, same. He has some big league time. Then you have Chase Petty, who is a pretty good young prospect. He had some, he got beat up a little bit in his short time in the big leagues, but that's not unusual. So you have him, and then you have Jose Franco, who they really liked, added to the 40-man. And that's 5 guys, 4 of them with big league starting experience, but all with upside as your AAA rotation. All of those guys also have options, which means that, if someone gets hurt, if it's maybe just like one, it's not like, okay, who do we have to fill in the rotation to be all around through? Okay, we got to make sure that they skip them this day and go on. No, it's like, okay, our opening's Tuesday. Who's throwing Tuesday in Louisville? All right, it's Chase Petty. All right, Chase, you can throw on Tuesday in Cincinnati. So I think that depth is something that's been really good. And when you look at that Louisville team, seems like the last couple of years they've had either really good hitting or really good pitching and then just had to fill the rest. They should have some like players both in the lineup and in the rotation and then in the bullpen, guys like Luis May and Zach Maxwell, Big Sugar, if you will. You have those guys. So you have talent that maybe other years would be in the minors or in the majors. Will Benson could be in AAA.
Yeah.
JJ Bleday has options. You have guys with options. Christian Encarnacion Strand will probably be there. Tyler Callahan is a guy who played in the big leagues shortly last year and had an unfortunate accident where he broke his arm making a catch that they then said he didn't make, even though it came out of his glove because his arm was broken and somehow was not a catch. I think that AAA team is going to be better and more well-rounded, which is kind of a health check of an organization, right? Like if you don't have enough at AAA, you don't have enough.
And that starting group was second only to the Phillies in FanGraphs WAR last year, and it just feels like it could be better than that. So that's exciting. What about, though, the guys who will be coming in after the starters we just named? The bullpen, there are a few new names and faces here who were acquired over the winter. Caleb Ferguson, Pierce Johnson. Tell us how this group is shaking out and what the hierarchy might be.
Yeah, I mean, like you have Emilio Pagan had 31 saves last year. He'll be at the end of the bullpen.
Brock Burke. I forgot Brock Burke.
You
also
forgot Brock
here.
Burke.
Mm-hmm.
Caleb Ferguson. So you have last year they didn't really have a lefty and a traditional left-hander in the bullpen. For so much of the season, it was Brent Suter who, Brent, just one of the great people in the game, but he's not a loogie. He is really just, he's a guy who throws left-handed as opposed to a left-hander, right? Sam Maul had been that, but Sam struggled with some injuries and inconsistency last year. I don't know that their bullpen is worse than it was a year ago. And honestly, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't. So as relief team stats, I just did it. They were, where were they last year? They were middle of the road last year. 16, according to FanGraphs WAR. And I think, for as much as you can guess on bullpens, and I kind of always just take the feeling of like nobody understands how to find good bullpen pieces other than the Rays, and they're not telling anybody. The Dodgers just sign everybody, so that's a little different. But yeah, no, I think they're a better bullpen than they were a year ago. You still have Tony Santillan in the back, Graham Ashcraft, who, if you look under the hood, his numbers were better. Those numbers were better than his others. And you're trying to replace Scott Barlow and Brent Suter. And both fantastic guys who did a great job last year. But you don't stay up at night wondering how to replace Scott Barlow.
One last one here in my haste to talk about Chase Burns. I think I skipped over just a few hitters. If you could kind of put a bow on the bats by telling us where some of these guys are going to play and how. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I guess wondering about Matt McLain and can he get back to the player he was in his rookie year. But then also, McLain is one of many righty bats. And so how do these guys fit in? Who ends up on the bench? Is there platooning that happens here? Just how does it all shake out and how good can McLain be?
I think for the most part, the organization is very high on Matt McLain, as am I. Look at that 2 years with that shoulder injury. And I really think he should be a lot more like the 2023 Matt McLain than the 2025 after missing all of 2024. I'm high on him as their everyday second baseman. I think he will be their everyday second baseman. I can see him working his way into that number 2 spot in the lineup. The thing is, they don't have a lot of left-handed hitters. TJ Friedl, their leadoff guy, Will Benson, JJ Bleday, Nate Lowe, if he makes a team, and I think he may, especially because they don't have those left-handed bats, and that would help. Or Nathaniel Lowe, sorry. But yeah, so I'm a big believer in Matt McLain. I think Matt McLain will be their everyday second baseman, and I think he will have a bounce-back year.
All right. Well, on the heels of making the playoffs, but not having a home game in the playoffs, what would constitute success for the Cincinnati Reds in 2026?
Advancing in the playoffs.
Thereby having a home game.
Yeah. Not only having a home game, but likely winning one, which they haven't done since probably 95. 12 was when they won the first 2 at Candlestick, or not Candlestick, at AT&T in San Francisco. I'm not that old. And and then lost 3 at home because that was the weird year where that was the format. And 2010, the Phillies came in and swept them. And yeah, they had that playoff game at home in 99 against the Mets, lost, or that 163 or whatever. But yeah, again, didn't win then. So yeah, it would have been beating the Los Angeles Dodgers in 1995 and advancing.
And lastly, I promised that we would invoke Votto somehow here, since you were one of the foremost Votto correspondents in the media during his career.
Yeah.
And
Chief stenographer.
Yes. He is now embarking on his expected post-playing media career. And I remember before he retired, he did say something like, I could envision myself just going off into the wilderness and you'll never hear from me again. And I was skeptical just because at the time he was like on TikTok trying to make memes and go viral. And it's like, you don't really seem like you're just going to go away forever. He did, though, for a little while. And
for a year.
He traveled and he indulged some other hobbies, but he did come back to baseball, and he has now been signed by NBC Sports, along with Anthony Rizzo and Clayton Kershaw. And of course, Votto was just a major media prospect. Everyone has said, he'll be the best at this for his whole career, essentially. So are we going to get the full Votto in the booth experience? Do you think he's going to be a natural? Will everyone fall in love with him all over again? Will there be an adjustment period? Will we see his star rise even further?
I'm not sure exactly where he's going to be, and he has not said, nor has NBC, if he's going to be a studio guy or in the booth. He may not be the best right away, but if he spends more than a year doing it, I solidly believe that he could be the best ever.
Best ex-player,
best baseball commentator ever.
Wow. Watch out, Vin Scully. Joey Votto's coming for you.
Maybe not play-by-play.
Okay.
But yeah. Common color guy.
Yeah.
I think, or even studio. Joey, we've all heard Joey talk. It's going to take some time to get to his points quicker and do these things, but he will have insights that nobody else in the world can give or would have. And for the fans who love to not just watch and enjoy the game, but think about it, I can't imagine anyone being any better than Joey Votto. You know, there's the old Simpsons one where they're like, Bart says to his dad, "Hey, Homer, I really preferred your half-ass parenting to this or whatever." And Homer goes, "But I thought I was using my whole ass." Joey doesn't do anything half-assed. If he goes into it, he's going to go to be the best, and I think he will.
Well, I can't imagine anyone being better at covering the Reds than C. Trent Rosecrans, and you can follow all of his writing at The Athletic. Always a pleasure. Hope we lived up to the expectations of the multiple people who wrote in with questions for you. We relayed them. You answered them. Thanks as always, Trent.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
And with that, we are more than halfway through the season preview series. 8 pods, 16 teams down, 7 pods, 14 teams to go. Cubs and Guardians next time. Also, Meg requested that I note on the outro that Roman Anthony is a good example of when an early extension can work out or be a relatively fair deal, at least. She said that thought occurred to her as we were talking about the Red Sox with Alex, and she meant to note it related to the banter about Konnor Griffin at the top of the pod. Lots of discussion about our discussion of the player who supposedly has legs like a centaur, according to Brian Wu. One Patreon supporter in our Discord group said that if we're being pedantic about the mythical creature comparison, then based on the number of legs, it really should have been a fawn, not a centaur, because Mariners prospect Ryan Sloan has 2 legs, not 4. Fair enough, though I think what Wu said is acceptable on that level. You can have legs like a centaur and not have as many legs as a centaur. We also got at least one defense of that comp from listener Chris, who says, "I was just listening to the most recent episode, and I must tell you that in 2010, I was in the Mets locker room after a game, and I saw a relief pitcher I won't name naked from behind. I had never seen such enormous musculature. It was kind of shocking. To Meg's point, this is not a horny thing. It's like each cheek of his butt was an individual back." Wow, what a phrase. Ever since, and I've described it many times, I've referred to it as feeling like I was looking at the back of a centaur. It's not about the tiny hooves. All right, then. Wu was not the first to say that a player's legs looked like a centaur. Guess I've got to Google some 2010 Mets bullpen butts. Also, the latest and perhaps last on our heroic barback listener/patron, McGarity, who gave free beer to a fellow listener. Guess he's not only our patron now that he has signed up for Patreon, but he became a patron to a patron of his bar. What a versatile word. And she, the recipient of the free beverage, is also a Patreon supporter who revealed herself on our Patreon Discord group and said, "In case anyone was wondering, I am the woman from the bar who was given a round for bringing up Effectively Wild. The date did not go well. This led to a general clamoring for her to date McGarity, a possibility I had floated on the last podcast, and she seemed to entertain the idea. However, I heard from McGarity again, who said, "Wow, this thing has really taken on a life of its own. In a different timeline, it could have made for a hell of a meet cute and some excellent podcast fodder, but I am quite happily engaged to a very wonderful woman. She is not an Effectively Wild listener, but does have many other redeeming qualities. I have fortunately converted her from someone who didn't really care about baseball at all into at least a casual fan. I say I did that, but Shohei did the heavy lifting. One small primer on why he is a unicorn. I questioned the centaur comp, but Shohei has long been likened to a unicorn. Anyway, one small primer on why he is a unicorn, a couple highlight reels later, and she was in. Guess I have to show up in the Discord group only to let the people down. However, he says, I did reach out to the woman who sparked this whole thing on Reddit after the first time it was mentioned on the pod and sent an invite to talk ball over a beer. Hopefully that comes to fruition. So maybe not a romantic meet cute, but why can't a platonic meeting be cute? Why can't this be the beginning of a beautiful friendship? So sorry, ladies, McGarity is taken, and I'm sure he is quite a catch. And even if sparks didn't fly, this did, as McGarity said, spark some fine podcast conversation. If you'd care to join McGarity and his drink recipient and many other Patreon supporters of the podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/FanGraphs patreon.com/effectivelywild and signing up to pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get yourself access to some perks. As have the following 5 listeners: Travis Calvin, Shocker Saman, Jason Hill, Christine Gu, and Casey Clowen Dunsworth. Thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include access to the Effectively Wild Discord group for patrons only, monthly bonus episodes, playoff live streams, prioritized email answers, shoutouts at the end of episodes, potential podcast appearances, discounts on merch and ad-free FanGraphs memberships, and so much more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast platforms. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild. And you can check the show notes in the podcast post at FanGraphs or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. We'll be back with one more episode before the end of the week. Talk to you then.
What's